And apart from writing, I'm just going to veer away from your writing a bit. You also a painter, is that correct?
Yes.
And you've exhibited.
Yeah.
Is it something that runs parallel to your writing at the moment?
Well, at the moment I don't do any writing, but I do paint.
Yeah.
I find painting a lot easier than writing because you can immediately see if you block in a painting, it takes you about 5 minutes, and you can say, well, this thing's going to work or it won't work. But if you write a novel, you never know. Even when you finish it, you don't know whether it's working or not.
And the subject matter of your paintings?
I paint what I see. I paint people, landscapes, and at the moment I do wildlife, abstract wildlife paintings, which are more like Bushman paintings, or I try at least.
Yeah. But, moving back to the novel, and the fact that there is a sort of subtext, if you like, that's somewhat autobiographical, and it certainly reflects a real situation in Africa today, the HIV/AIDS pandemic. Have you ever been in a situation where you've actually run a lottery to help a patient, save a patient?
I don't want to blow my cover. I have helped patients in unofficial ways, yes, not actually by lottery, but I've done.
Is that the sort of thing that could happen within an African context elsewhere?
Very much so, yeah. You always have, you find, for instance, someone that needs something urgently, and if you go through official channels, it's going to take too long, and then you can appeal to various organizations or people for money, and then just pay for this operation or whatever, or treatment.
One of the things that also comes through in your novel is the sort of interaction between the community and the hospital. It's a much more permeable sort of wall between the community and the hospital that one would see in probably a Western context.
I think a hospital, I think rural medicine is much more personal than modern medicine. I mean, you're well known in a community, and people have direct access to you, and also to the hospital, and it becomes part of the community, much more so than in a so-called civilized society.
Okay, I just want to read a bit from a preface that you wrote to the book. It says, I started writing this novel when antiretroviral drugs were available only to the privileged few. Since then, there has been some progress, but in many parts of Africa, the conditions described in this novel still prevail, and the majority of people living with HIV/AIDS don't have free access to antiretroviral drugs. Is that still the case?
I think it is changing as we speak. I think Botswana is probably the benchmark in how it should be done, because Botswana certainly got the best antiretroviral program in Africa, and certainly is comparable to anything you'll find in the rest of the world. But having said that, for the rest of Africa, it's a logistical problem. If you run up into millions of AIDS sufferers and you've got to treat them, it becomes a huge logistical problem, because you cannot just dish out the drugs and hope they'll work. You've got to monitor it, and you've got to actually make sure that your patients are knowledgeable about the side effects of the drug and about the usage of the drug. So it's an enormous workload. And my personal view is that where you run into big numbers with AIDS patients in countries which have lagged behind, which didn't see this problem coming, it's going to be difficult to control it. And I think there's, in my opinion, 2 countries in Africa which will get on top of it, or should get on top of the pandemic, and that's Botswana and Uganda.
And what do you see as Botswana as a southern African country has sort of been, as you say, quite pioneering in the way it's responded to the pandemic. South Africa itself, how do you see us moving forward?
I don't know. They started a massive antiretroviral rollout. I would hope that it's successful. But the thing that concerns me is that the sheer logistics of treating that many patients is going to become a problem. So I can't say in the long term. I haven't been working in South Africa for quite a while, so I can't really judge.
To what
But I would
extent?
thought that might be a problem.
Yeah. Sorry. And to what extent has the sort of AIDS denialism that we've had, particularly in South Africa, maybe affected your work in Botswana? Has that had any impact there?
I think denial is a big problem with all HIV patients. And I think the stigma that's been attached to HIV has been a big problem in the beginning. Because if you have a disease that you can't cure and somebody's got it, then people are going to try and sweep it under the carpet. And in Botswana, there's been a very active move to try and get away from that and try and get people to test voluntarily. But you can do it in Botswana because you can treat patients. And you can actually see the attitude change from the time before we had antiretroviral drugs to now. People come forward, they get tested, and they know if you put them on antiretroviral drugs, it's going to work. But you cannot really isolate one aspect of antiretroviral treatment. You've got to address everything. But denial will, if you don't have anything to offer, then people are not going to come forward and test.
And to what extent do you find patients in Botswana access traditional medicine?
I think that's a problem all over Africa. Traditional doctors are there, and many people go to traditional doctor before they go to Western doctor. And I think the best one can do is to try and cooperate instead of just condemning it. But that's a reality of Africa, everywhere in Africa where you go. But that happens to this day. And like I told you before the interview, I read a book by a doctor who's been practicing in Africa for 55 years. And he describes right at the beginning how he had to deal with traditional doctors. And it's still happening. The exact scenario is still happening today. So it is there, yes.
To what extent is it a hindrance? Are you seeing people not being able to access?
It can be if people do it instead of antiretroviral drugs, or if a guy is on antiretroviral drugs and he uses traditional medicine, it can be a hindrance, especially if he doesn't tell you about it. If people are open about it, you can explain the situation to them. But you cannot use, in my opinion, anything as an alternative to antiretroviral drugs ultimately. Ultimately, if you have AIDS, you're going to need antiretroviral drugs.
To what extent do you feel working in Africa that the HIV/AIDS pandemic has been taken seriously or not seriously by the developed world? Is there more of a role they could play?
I think they are doing a lot. You get people like Bill Gates and Bill Clinton, who spends a huge amount of money in Africa on antiretroviral drugs, and that really makes a difference. Even in Botswana, antiretroviral drugs are being funded by Bill Gates, and you get other organizations like Harvard AIDS Foundation all get involved in Africa. I think one thing that I can see as a problem is hands. There's just not enough hands to do the work in Africa, because there's always a shortage of doctors in rural areas. And that doesn't only apply to Africa, it also applies to anywhere in the third world. And I don't know how one is going to solve that problem. So.
And then I think a final question, and the obvious one, are you working on another novel?
Not at the moment. I'm thinking about one, but I don't get much time to write at the moment. But I'm sort of rattling it in my head, and eventually I'll hopefully put it on paper.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen.
Okay.